Your four favorites are RoboCop, Enemy, Venus Wars, and The Departed. This is the third four favorites video in a row where RoboCop has come up. The last two times I recommended it, this time it's in the four favorites. So if anyone watching this hasn't seen RoboCop, this is your sign to watch RoboCop. The first movie that came to mind when I looked at your four favorites was Source Code. Like RoboCop, the protagonist wakes up in a body that isn't exactly his own. Like Enemy, it stars Jake Gyllenhaal and it's about identity. It's a sci-fi action film like Venus Wars. Like The Departed, Vera Farmiga is in it. And the protagonist is trying to figure out the identity of a bomber, which makes me think of how the characters in The Departed are trying to figure out the identity of a mole.
So you're the...
Duel is a satirical sci-fi thriller like RoboCop. It involves doubles where the star is playing a dual role like Enemy. The protagonist has to participate in a publicized duel to the death, which kind of reminds me of how everyone watches and bets on the Battle Bike games in Venus Wars. And similar to what I said about the characters in The Departed trying to figure out who the mole is, the characters in this movie end up trying to figure out who's the clone and who's the original. I think it's interesting how duality plays an important role in your favorites, but it's depicted in three totally different ways. In RoboCop, the protagonist is part man, part machine, so he's got these two sides to himself. In Enemy, the characters are doppelgangers. And in The Departed, a lot of the characters are living double lives. Upgrade is about a cyborg like RoboCop. I wrote down a lot of movies with twins, lookalikes, doppelgangers, or doubles like Enemy, and I don't want to recommend all of them, but the ones I think you'd like the most are Images, Dead Ringers, The One I Love, Infinity Pool, Lost Highway, and Nancy. And when it comes to characters living double lives, like in The Departed, the most obvious comparison is Infernal Affairs because The Departed is a remake of this movie. But I also think you might like The Outfit, which also involves the Irish mob like The Departed. And in this one, there are characters trying to figure out who the rat in their organization is, which is kind of like the whole mole thing in The Departed.
Mole.
The combination of RoboCop and Venus Wars makes me think you might like Mechanical Violator Hakkaida. Repo Man, like RoboCop, is a satirical sci-fi film from the mid-80s with similar social commentary regarding consumerism, corporations, and Reaganomics. RoboCop and The Departed both involve the police, and RoboCop and Venus Wars are both sci-fi, so I wanted to recommend a few sci-fi movies involving police, so I think you should check out Strange Days and The Hidden. You already saw a lot of the anime films I wanted to recommend since you're a fan of Venus Wars, but I think you'd enjoy Redline. And this one is live action, but the Battle Bike games in Venus Wars feel comparable to Rollerball. When I was thinking of Enemy, Spider came to mind for obvious reasons, but also because I think both movies have similar vibes. They both have very small casts that create this feeling of isolation. The protagonists in both films are questioning their identities and reality, and they're both very psychological and surreal. But a couple other movies that came to mind because of that vibe where someone is questioning their identity and reality are Memento and Shutter Island, which, like The Departed, was directed by Martin Scorsese and stars Leonardo DiCaprio. Speaking of The Departed, I think you should check out Scarface because Scorsese pays homage to this movie in The Departed, because both movies implement the same visual motif where an X appears either to foreshadow or during a death scene.
Mole, 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 mole.